You're listening to the Roovolution podcast. Join us as we bust myths and challenge common assumptions, helping you to revolutionize your rooster experience.
This week we have a particularly fun topic. We're going to be diving into the remarkable abilities that your rooster has that you might not have been aware of. If humans were capable of the same, they would fairly be labeled superpowers.
Totally. The first one that comes to mind is something that is really quite simple, and maybe a lot of you already know this, but I don't think a lot of people stop and think about it most of the time, and that's just their perception of time. The speed at which they live their lives on a day-to-day basis. I think it's a general rule for the animal kingdom that the smaller an animal gets, the faster their resting heart rate is and the faster their perception of time is. Think of, an elephant being slow moving and perhaps slow thinking versus, a hummingbird or an insect being able to move so fast we humans can't even perceive it. Chickens are somewhere in the middle, but they're definitely faster, and quicker to respond to things than we are, certainly.
Definitely. And if you've ever had one peck a reflection in your eye, you know how quick they can be. Their ability to focus in on things is just lightning fast. And they need that reaction time, that reaction speed to stay safe in their environment, to react to threats. So it makes perfect sense, but they're definitely operating on a very different level than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'd say, just guessing here, but I think that their perception of time must be, at least a few times faster than our own. Think like dog years almost. People are so familiar with this concept that time moves differently for small animals, and a dog year is like 7 human years. And so if a dog is experiencing 1 year as though it's 7 years, every single day or every single minute is so much longer than we're perceiving it. It's like they're living in slow motion.
Right. It actually makes me think of, an experience that humans actually can sort of relate to is trying to evaluate how long, say, a year is. We're looking at this as a percentage of our life. And so a year feels like an eternity when we're 6. It's an entire 1/6 of our life. But as we get older, and this is the psychological explanation for this phenomenon, the older we get, the less of a percentage of our entire lives that we've experienced that becomes. And therefore the perception of it becomes far, far shorter as compared to when we were young and had less life experience under our belt. I imagine the same applies to animals, that with those shorter lifespans, everything is just prolonged. Everything feels very different to them than it would to us.
Every moment is a little bit more drawn out than it would be for us. Definitely. If we could, scale that up and we could react as fast as chickens do, we would have a superpower. We'd be like, the Flash or whatever.
Yeah, they're nuts. Oh, now I'm thinking it back when we used to record, when we would give the hens treats, and we thought one day to slow down and watch this in slow motion, because if you ever try to watch a hen grab food, it's just, it's impossible to see what they're doing. They've already done it by the time you can even track them. So we went, okay, well, let's slow this down. Let's put it in slow motion and see what's really going on here. And we watched it, and that was fine. And then we switched it back to full speed, normal speed.
And it looks completely barbaric.
Oh my gosh.
It's incredible. In real time, they look like they're just mad pecking at the food with no real, dexterity or anything. But man, when you look at it in slow motion, they're manipulating each individual seed with their tongue before they even eat it. Like they're not only choosing which seed they're going to eat, they're also taking into account the other hens around them and, whether they're in the way or, going to get pecked or whatever. And they're navigating all of that in a millisecond. It's incredible.
Oh yeah, there's so much nuance behind what looks like just a blur to us. Yeah. I didn't even know they were using their tongue to that. But just lightning fast, just to the level that once you've seen it and been able to process it and you go back, it looks completely unnatural. Mm-hmm. We had to confirm multiple times that we hadn't put this in fast forward or something. That's how wild it was. But yeah, this is the speed at which they live their lives. And it's part of the reason that they are so prone to these misunderstandings and overreactions that they have, is just they're taking in so much more than we can even keep up with, and forming so much faster conclusions than we could possibly anticipate. Also a reason that slow movements around them are probably appreciated. It kind of keeps both of us on the same level, I think, in a strange way.
Definitely. That being said, I will say that, if you're going to be interacting with chickens, if you're going to be, mediating any conflicts or things like that, it's incredibly helpful if you're able to sort of step up your game and speed up your reaction time, being able to, notice things quicker than you did before and be able to respond quicker than you would normally, kind of put you a little closer to their world, and a lot of times it can prevent a lot of problems.
Definitely. Well, and it can reassure the keeper too, because I can think of so many instances where our boys have, been having a pecking order change up. They've been having some kind of conflict, and those interactions look so chaotic and so dangerous to us. And I'm convinced at this point that it's because we just can't actually understand what's happening. We can't see the movements. We can't see what's really going on, because we've done the same thing with those instances where we've slowed down that footage. And we've been just astonished to see how meticulous they are, how many of those blows they're dodging, how often they're pulling back just millimeters short of making contact with that other bird. It's actually astounding how in control they are in that situation. It looks like a flurry of feathers to us, and it's really easy to panic.
And when you slow it down, it looks like a graceful martial arts.
It really does. It's always a good way to kind of calm down about the way that they have these social interactions, because they say things big, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually out of control. And odds are good that because of that fast reaction and processing time, they do know exactly what they're doing, and they're navigating it very effectively. It's just going to look really, really crazy to a human observer.
Definitely.
But on the note of looks, though, and how things look to us as opposed to them, one of these crazy abilities that they have is known as monovision. And what this means is that roosters, or any chickens, any birds, I believe, have one nearsighted eye and one farsighted eye. They actually have specialized vision by hemisphere. The really fascinating thing about this is how it comes about. It's actually based on light exposure in the egg. So as they're developing in the egg, they'll turn their bodies in such a way that one side of their head is tucked in against their body and completely protected from light, while the other side is exposed to that outer shell and the light coming through it. And the result of this is that our chickens hatch with nearsighted vision in one eye and farsighted vision in the other. This serves them absolutely perfectly for things like scanning the skyline for predators while foraging. They can literally focus on those traits on the ground while simultaneously focusing on the sky and watching for any danger at the same time.
Definitely. And, as keepers, we can use this information in our daily interaction with them, approaching them from the right angle or side, making ourselves known to them, to their far-sighted eye before we get too close and potentially spook them. If we're handling them and they're on our lap or something, making sure that they have the opportunity to put their far-sighted eye to the outside and their nearsighted eye towards us, can often make them a lot more comfortable with that situation.
Right. And if you've ever, cuddled your chickens close, you might have noticed that sometimes they're very relaxed and other times they might be a little bit uneasy or a little bit on edge, and you can tell they're just unsettled. This can easily be the reason why, because if they've got that, worse blurry eye pointing outward, they're going to feel at a disadvantage and they're going to feel vulnerable. And it may not have anything to do with the fact that they're on your lap. It may literally be as simple as turning them 180 degrees so that they can see more clearly. Something that I always ask whenever I come across anyone who's looking for advice on how to help a rooster who's had an eye injury is, which eye did they hurt? Because if they hurt that nearsighted eye, now it's worth mentioning, typically the right eye is going to be the nearsighted one and the left eye is going to be the far-sighted one. That is the norm. But in the same way that a very small, percentage of humans will have their heart in a different position in their chest than normal, it's possible, I imagine, that could not be the case for some boys. So if you're looking at your bird's behavior and you start noticing that he's always pointing his left eye towards the ground when he eats, don't necessarily rule that out. But the bottom line is that if that nearsighted eye gets damaged, they're going to be struggling to find food, they're going to struggle to forage, they're going to have these issues probably with eating and things close up. They might benefit from, say, a larger dish than treats scattered on the ground, for instance. But if they injure that far-sighted eye, we can see some really interesting behaviors come from that, because not being able to keep an eye out for distant predators approaching or aerial predators in the sky is going to leave them in a near constant state of anxiety and vulnerability. And a stressed or anxious rooster is often going to panic, overreact, and take that out on whatever's close by. So these are just kind of things to keep in mind, ways to engage with them and understand what their limitations are going to be based around this.
Yeah, so along the same lines, another incredible ability they have is a 300-degree field of view. They can practically see all the way behind them, but they do have a blind spot of 60 degrees right in the back of their head. They have a 30-degree field of view that is binocular, so they can see with both eyes straight in front of them, just like we can. But they have a much larger peripheral view than we do. Just, again, giving them an incredible ability to perceive the things around them, see those predators coming, see you coming, and be able to respond even sooner or more appropriately.
Right, exactly. And we've used this to our advantage too, not only for avoiding spooking them, but if we're going to be holding them, we try to make sure that our face is in that 60-degree blind spot, basically right behind the back of their head, because even sometimes when we feel like we are out of that range where they would be able to see us, what would be out of our peripheral, we're in very clear vision. So when we hold them to our side, if we don't have a hand at the back of their head to control them, we try to make sure that we are positioned in such a way that they would have difficulty seeing and targeting anything on our face. Because chickens are curious and they peck, and it's better to be safe than sorry. But the other thing they're capable of doing is moving both of those eyes independently. So if you've ever seen your hens scratching around looking for treats, and it looks like every time they go to dig, they look up from the ground, and you wonder how they're even seeing what they're doing, they're very likely taking one of those eyes and directing it to the ground and watching their feet and what's going on down there, while angling that other eye up towards the sky or out across the field, or wherever they might need to put it in order to confirm that nothing is approaching.
And while we're on the subject of their special eyes, did you know they can also see UV light?
Exactly. And this comes up a lot when people want to know why their rooster is crowing at like 4:30 in the morning when it's pitch black out. This is the catch. It's not pitch black for them. It's pitch black for us because we can't see that early morning light spectrum of the UV coming through. But they can, and they know when the sun is on its way. Where this gets really tricky, though, is that they can also see the UV spectrum of, say, the clothes or the shoes.
The reflection of that UV.
Yep, that we were out to their run. So if you've ever looked up the way that birds have these hidden markings, most bird species and a lot of flower species actually also have these kind of hidden to us markings in UV. And when viewed with that UV spectrum filter, we see these incredible patterns emerge. And these are used to attract the animals that can see them. So in the case of birds, it might be used to attract a mate. They're going to have these special elaborate patternings that we aren't able to see. For flowers, they're attracting the insects that are able to perceive that and identifying themselves essentially as that preferred food source. So the bottom line here is really just that we honestly have no idea how certain things, or really any things, look to our birds. That rooster who attacks a certain pair of shoes or pair of pants, it may look like a perfectly boring set of white sneakers to us, but that may be just day glow disco to that rooster.
Yeah, when she says we can't even imagine, she really does mean it. I mean, even the scientists who study this and try their best to, generate a depiction of what a UV light would look like, they have to do something that our human eyes can see. Like, we can't see UV, so anything that they are claiming is what UV looks like is just an artistic rendition so that we can see it. It's still within our visible spectrum.
Right,
we have no idea what it looks like to the chickens.
Just an aid to help us get an idea or visualize. I've looked up a lot of those articles, actually, even recently, and they almost always have that fine text, disclaimer saying that this is not a literal depiction, that there is no such thing as that, and this is just the best approximation of what it might look like if we could see it. Sort of a fanciful, creative endeavor, really.
And, just another pretty common example that I think a lot of people can relate to, not so many people look into the UV spectrum, but the infrared spectrum is commonly used in our world. And although we can't see it with our own eyes, we have lots of technology and gadgets that essentially translate infrared light into something visible for us. And so it's something so simple that when people think or mention infrared light, they think of those night vision goggles, right? The green night vision, and most of us associate that with what infrared looks like, but that's not what infrared looks like. If we could see what infrared looks like, we would not need the goggles.
Well, in the same way as, heat signatures, if you use any kind of a, camera or device that identifies and conveys heat tracking or heat signatures, there's just really no way to know what that looks like. We've never seen it because we can't see it. I used to come across this very often in research into things like snake keeping, since they're able to see heat with those heat pits that they have. And there's the same kind of depictions that they give of what, say, a mouse might look like to them, but there's really no reason to believe that they're seeing it in rainbow color. It's just so far outside of our realm of experience that we just can't even fathom what that might be like. It's really a situation where anything's on the table. It could look crazy at a level that we can't even comprehend. The one thing that we can say for sure, though, is that they are not seeing the same world we're seeing, really in any way, shape, or form. The positive thing, because I hear people sometimes get, kind of distraught and upset when they learn about this, because it's like that shock of, oh my gosh, my pet chicken doesn't know what I look like. Because we have this identity and we think of how we appear to them. And it can be scary to think that we might look like some technicolor monster, going out to the run. The reassurance, I suppose, is that we look the same way we've always looked to them. They've never known anything else. So to them, it's normal. To us, I'm sure it would be terrifying. To them, it is normal once they become accustomed to us. But of course, some of these, like new tools, new clothes, new people even, it's very hard to say how intimidating that looks, how overstimulating that experience might be, or what exactly they're actually perceiving in that.
But it's really important to consider, again, so that we're not unnecessarily, startling or terrifying our birds. Even the little details like being in full sun versus shade, that could make a huge difference to a being that sees the UV spectrum. If an object or a piece of clothing you're wearing is absorbing and or reflecting a larger amount of light because you're in full sun, that could make a huge difference to how it affects the bird.
Right. Well, and they actually have yet another crazy feature to their vision that we don't have. So human vision consists of rods and cones as our two photoreceptors. The cones control our color vision and the rods control our night vision. So chickens have both the cones and rods, just like we do, but within those cones they have an additional photoreceptor, which is oil droplets. And these essentially act as a micro lens which amplifies and refines their color vision. So, you know how you hear people say that roosters hate red? And that always seems kind of like a silly thing, and why would they be so bothered? Their color vision is just cranked through the roof thanks to this adaptation. This actually isn't even just chickens, this is birds in general, and even reptiles have these oil droplets that we lack. So in addition to seeing a whole additional spectrum, seeing far more at a time and processing far more at a time than we do, they're also getting this over intense color experience on top of that. It'd
be overwhelming for us humans.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in, and especially as a prey animal where every bit of that data is, critically necessary for survival. It really starts to explain why they can be so visually reactive, and why sometimes the things they respond to look to us like there's absolutely no excuse for their unhappy behavior about it.
Yeah, the apparent inconsistency.
Right.
It's consistent for them. We can't even fathom, like you said, those subtle differences that make the world a difference to them.
Yeah. So I find the best thing to do really is just to go off of their cues. If they freak out about something, it's really easy to think that it looks like, it couldn't have been anything that triggered it. Nothing strange was happening. Nothing was scary about this. It's best really to kind of just trust their responses. Since we're so far removed from that experience, the best indication we're going to have is their reactions. If they happen to freak out about a particular color of scoop or shovel handle, the best thing to do is really just to remove that from the equation. We're not even going to have any opportunity to assess it the way they're assessing it. So
yeah, and perhaps this leads into the next superpower, and it deals with how they react or don't react, and we could call it stoicism. Their tendency to not react, or not at least overreact to maybe pain or threat. Since they're prey animals, they need to essentially maintain control to such a high degree so that they have a chance of surviving.
Exactly. And actually, stoicism is the correct term for that. That is like the scientifically correct term. And it's defined as the ability to endure pain or discomfort or hardship without showing any kind of reaction or complaint. And
that's not to say that they don't experience pain. That's a common misconception, that,
right.
Across the animal kingdom. I think there's a misconception that a lot of animals in general don't experience pain at all, or to the degree that we humans do. But they definitely experience pain. They have pain receptors. And they're way better at hiding it. They're way tougher than we are.
They are. It's a predator avoidance behavior. And so because predators are going to naturally single out the weak members of a flock or herd, anyone who appears to be at a disadvantage is going to be the first target. Often the flock themselves will actually turn on those weakened individuals because they call attention to the flock and jeopardize the safety of everyone in it. So they have a lot of really strong survival reasons to not let on and to push that down any way they possibly can. What's interesting is that this actually is not isolated, or for a long time was not isolated to other animals. There was quite a long period of time, and not that far in the past, when the medical profession didn't believe that human newborns felt pain. The idea of administering things like anesthetic to newborns for surgeries is actually surprisingly and horrifyingly new. And it was the same kind of idea, that they just had some kind of different physiology, or that nervous system wasn't developed enough. It was kind of honestly a perception of babies just cry all the time. It doesn't mean anything. So similar, a little bit of a different, it was more of they're acting like they're in pain all the time so we can dismiss it. With chickens, it's much more they're never acting like they're in pain. And so people mistakenly believe that nothing is going on.
Yeah. I want to mention, too, not to just constantly, talk crap about humans, because we are humans, too, believe it or not. But, it's not like this is exclusive to chickens or the animal world. there's plenty of humans out there, you may be one of them, that have experienced and endured, significant pain, who have built up a tolerance. You've practiced that ability to cope with it and not overreact. Everybody knows that as children, something we don't have experience with is prone to being, overreacted to, or, received in an exaggerated and dramatic way. But over time and with, different experiences, we can build our pain tolerance, whether it's the common thing like recognizing it's just a paper cut and not breaking down and crying, all the way up to, the martial artists, the monks in the mountains that, develop this incredible superhuman ability to tolerate pain. And it's kind of just a choice, the pain response and that function in a living creature is just that. It's just a function. It's a function of survival, really. It's an indicator that something is wrong and you need to pay attention to it. And once you've identified it, you can respond appropriately. Whatever, what appropriate is maybe up for debate, depending on the severity of the injury. But
right. Well, and for a chicken, appropriate is often to do everything in their power not to call attention to it. What interests me particularly about this is how often it comes up at opposite ends of the spectrum. So you'll have, for instance, there's a very, very strong consensus within the community that it's incredibly hard to keep chickens alive. It's incredibly hard to treat them. And it's incredibly hard to catch these injuries before they become too severe to help. And the reason for that is always cited as being this tendency that they don't act like anything's wrong until it's really bad and way too late to do anything about it. But then we get into, topics like, for instance, spur removal, where the biggest defense of that practice is that they act like they're fine. So spur removal, if anyone isn't familiar, that would be the recommendation to either twist off the spur caps, spur casings with something like pliers, or to use heat to loosen, which is really just cooking the connective tissues between that spur casing and the quick of the spur. But essentially,
or to cut it off entirely.
Near the leg. Right. And so it's always kind of this cognitive disconnect where the people who are recommending it are saying that it isn't a problem, it doesn't hurt them because they act fine, they don't flinch, they don't give any kind of indication that it's painful. Now, of course, this is the exact same phenomenon in both of these cases. The same thing that causes them to play it off like they're perfectly fine when they have fly strike or some terrible gash under their wing that's getting infected or a horrible reproductive infection. The same thing is at play here. They're just going to really try very hard not to let on.
Our boys specifically, two of our boys have lost some spurs of their own doing. Maelstrom has lost one spur, and Daisy has lost both of his spurs. In all three cases, we believe that they kicked them off themselves. Because of the way that they kick, we think that they wound up kicking them off. But when we noticed it had happened, they were walking around like nothing had happened.
Right.
They're clucking and tidbitting and finding treats in the ground. They were even pecking at the blood that was coming out of them.
Yeah, that was one way that we realized
they're
something
not
had happened.
Squawking or flailing or yelling or any of it. They weren't even trying to come to us and indicate that something was wrong. They just went about business as normal.
Yeah, no, they just sucked it up. With that first one, we only knew something happened because we happened to spot a completely intact spur lying on the ground. Yep. We had to scan and try to figure out, and only found out who it was just by the fact that one was missing. But no behavior change whatsoever. And you could tell from heart rate, you could tell from, his pupil constriction once you got him in, that he was under severe stress. He was incredibly uncomfortable. Applying pressure to that leg would cause his pupils to constrict. And
he would retract his leg as well.
Right, slowly retracting the leg away. Mm-hmm. Or a little bit quickly, a few times there too, sort of almost in a panic. But if we had just let him go, he would have been acting acting like everything was hunky-dory.
Yeah.
But the pupil response is often one of the only reliable or somewhat reliable indicators of pain in chickens, at least for the person who's treating something at home. A vet would monitor things like blood pressure, heart rate, in addition to this, to get a feel for their pain levels and what kind of interventions might be needed. But as for just the backyard keeper, about the only way that we're going to easily be able to track is those pupil movements. And this is a little bit tricky because pain isn't the only thing that makes them constrict their pupils. They'll constrict them when they're intrigued by something, startled, curious.
Enjoying something.
Enjoying
thoroughly.
when they're very relaxed.
Yeah.
They're kind of flashing those pupils on a fairly regular basis. So at least for us, if we're having to feel over a leg or something that we think might be hurt, we're very gently palpating that leg. And if we happen to see the pupils constrict, we'll say, whoa, go back. And we'll try kind of just gently feeling that area again and see if it's replicated. Because it could just be that they heard an interesting sound, had an interesting thought, any of a number of
context
things.
is definitely important.
Yeah.
If you're petting them or rubbing their cheeks or wattles and they look like they're enjoying it, and you see their pupils constrict, they're probably enjoying it. But if you suspect an injury or they've been acting off and you go searching for it and you see those pupils constrict, chances are they're hiding some pain.
Yeah, that's the mile marker. That's the red flag that says something might be wrong here. So it's just one of those things that can really mislead people because we can't imagine, some of the injuries that they get, we can't imagine tolerating that with no indication. And so we kind of tend to put this human lens on it and figure, well, if I were hurting, I would do X, Y, or Z, and therefore they must be tolerating this or comfortable. It's really important because of this to err on the side of caution in all cases because they are masters of this. Now, this can vary a little bit. I will say I've been surprised by how willing our boys have been to actually indicate to us by a yelp or, various things that something is uncomfortable. But I'm absolutely convinced that it is a factor of security. If they feel at all in danger of being attacked, being ostracized, a predator accessing them, anything like that, they're going to move mountains to keep that from showing. They're only going to let you know if they happen to feel incredibly, incredibly comfortable where they are. And that's really not most roosters or most situations.
And this also sort of conveniently gets into the next thing, which is kind of the extreme version of this stoicism, and it's called tonic immobility. And it's just their instinctual, their natural defense, or not even a defense, but a mercy that nature has shown them when they are in imminent danger, when when they assume they are going to die in the near future, they essentially shut down and don't respond to anything. They sort of just check out and they're spared that terrible, horrifying experience.
Right. And so this is kind of like when we get past fight or flight, right? This is a level beyond. So this is when they are so stressed, they are so helpless, and they feel so doomed that they literally do just check out. You've probably actually seen this. There's quite a lot of videos that go around of hypnotized chickens. That's not actually hypnosis. This is what's going on there. And usually this involves, people sort of holding them near the ground and drawing a line in front of them.
Or holding them on their backs, cradling them like a baby on their backs.
Thing. Yeah, that's more the oxygen deprivation because of the placement of their lungs being along their back. They don't have a diaphragm, so all of their organs are going to rest right on their lungs in those positions.
But they don't flail around because they're in danger. They freeze and
right. They're trying to conserve oxygen rather than struggling and depleting it. It's sort of like if you were drowning, you don't want to flail. Same kind of concept there. So with that hypnotic thing, that's often misrepresented and sort of pinned on just almost this charming or cute idea that like roosters are just so, or chickens in general, are so simple-minded and easily duped that just drawing a line will just like disconnect their brain or something. I actually have to question whether it really is just as simple as drawing a line. I'd be very surprised if you came up to a resting chicken in their dust bath and drew a line and they went into that kind of response. I think what's really most important is that they're being pinned, they're feeling confined and trapped. They've probably tried to get away and seen that they can't. And then they go into this weird state where it's like things just stop firing until there's been enough of a delay where everything comes back online and they can get up and leave. But this is another of those crazy things where just when the situation feels absolutely hopeless and they have nothing that they think they can do to protect themselves anymore, yeah, they just disconnect, detach, and as you said, are saved from that experience and having to live through it. So,
yeah, I mean, I hate to list that on any list of superpowers because it's kind of sad, but it's definitely a unique ability that they have, and that we humans often, misperceive or misunderstand.
Right. Because a lot of this stuff, again, as prey animals, the last thing they want to do is call attention to themselves. So a lot of this looks deceptively peaceful and deceptively calm. We really have to be very skeptical when it comes to trying to take them at face value. They have tells, and this kind of comes back to the stoicism thing. We've been fairly successful in intervening early with our birds. We sometimes laugh about this, that there's no helping them until it's too late, only because we've been, I would say, so lucky to have caught all of these different things so quickly. But honestly, the only reason that we've been able to is because the signs that they give are so subtle. You have to know your flock really, really well. You have to spend a lot of time around them and know they're normal so that you can identify when they're being abnormal.
And on that note, being able to identify what their normal is so you can identify what is abnormal. I don't know that a lot of people are even aware that they have facial expressions. I mean, just like we do. It's crazy the extent to which they can express their emotions just with their eyes. Their eyelids, their eyebrows can change shape in so many different ways that they can tell you so many things just by how they're looking at you.
Absolutely. That intensity, their actual area of focus, all kinds of things. It's one of those that, again, it's hard because I know that if we were to show some photos, of maybe Midnight being condescending or Lotus being incredibly curious or Sunshine about to poop, all of these things really do come through in their expression. But someone who doesn't know them, there's just no way. There's no way that they're going to look at that and they're going to see what that means. We only know because we've watched the behavior that surrounds it every time. I know that when Sunshine gets this zoned out look in her eyes, within 20 seconds or so, she's going to poop. It's been like clockwork, but these are the kinds of things that time spent with them and careful observation will let you observe and let you take note of. And so it makes it so much easier to address these things. You can look at them and know when they're feeling unwell.
Just from a practical standpoint, even if you're not trying to get super close buddy with your chickens, it can save time and money being able to catch something early, being able to treat an illness or injury early before it becomes, before it gets out of hand.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm thinking back to, Lotus, one of our girls who had a soft shell egg. The only indication something was wrong there was that when we arrived to tuck them in and everyone had gotten up on the roost, she was sort of dilly-dallying in front of the coop. And that was incredibly abnormal for her. There was a clear reluctance to settle down for bed, and our first response was to pull her directly inside and start doing a once-over, get her into a soak. And sure enough, she laid a soft shell egg about an hour after that.
Right in your lap.
Right in my lap. We have it on video. It was quite horrifying, actually. I was very concerned for her. But then the girl who we have living inside with us right now, who's struggling with some, we believe, reproductive illness of some kind, and the vet is still working on trying to identify. We're hopeful that we'll get an actual answer there and a path forward pretty soon here. But the only giveaway for her was that when I throw out their grubs in the morning for them to run and eat first thing when I open the coop, she was a bit slow to go out there and sort of disinterested in eating her grubs. And she was walking around perfectly fine. She was alert. Her tail was up. She wasn't standing fluffed or hunched or anything like this. It was literally just that instead of bolting out of the coop for the bugs, she meandered out. And we brought her in and sure enough discovered that her belly was sort of tight and distended, and were able to get her into the vet pretty immediately after that.
And then,
X-rays.
Having her indoors, for that time, we started to see the irregularities or the less common poop consistencies that we were able to notice that she was having irregular poops.
Right. That would have blended in completely out with the flock. This is one reason I always recommend to people, if you have any concerns about the health of one of your birds, bring them inside. You will have full visibility of their consumption, food, water, bowel movements, their day-to-day, whether they're sleeping comfortably through the night, all of these things. So it's just invaluable insight to have. So it's really not so much that you can't, I always hate to hear that when people say, oh, there's just nothing you can do. They won't let you know until it's too late. You can. It does take time, and it does take a fair bit of observation, but you absolutely can. It's not that they don't show it at all. It's just that they don't show it in the way that you might expect, or to nearly the severity that you might expect.
Another thing you might not expect, and I guess if we're done with that topic, another thing you might not expect is the way that chickens sleep. They actually can, not that all of them do this all the time, but they can essentially sleep with one half of their brain at a time. So they can be wide awake, eye open, with half of their brain, and be asleep and dreaming on the other side.
Indeed. This is known as unihemispheric slow wave sleep, and it is a really crazy capability that they have. They can literally be both asleep and awake at the same time. This is something that was adapted basically, just to let them keep guard overnight so that they wouldn't be vulnerable to predation while they slept. It's actually something that you see in flying flocks, like in, I believe, geese would be probably the number one. But any of these birds that are traveling long distances, it's not an efficient use of energy to land and sleep. And so oftentimes they will utilize the same ability, basically just circling, riding the wind currents. Right, and they can stay awake enough to control those wing movements and remain airborne while actually fully asleep with the other half of their brain. So this is just another thing it's really hard to imagine how on earth that even works. How
if we could do that, it would be incredible.
Yeah, what is that experience even like? What does that feel like? But this explains really actually a surprising amount about some of their behavior. For instance, have you ever noticed that oftentimes if there are going to be fights over roosting spots at night, it's the middle ones that are in the hottest demand each evening? This is because the birds sleeping in the middle of the line are the ones who get to sleep completely, all at once through the night. The birds on the outside are tasked with being the sentinels. So whichever eye they have facing out and away from the flock, they're going to leave the side of the brain that controls that eye wide awake. They'll shut down the other half to sleep. And then periodically, every couple of hours or so, they'll stand up, they'll turn 180 degrees and switch sides. And they'll literally sleep and rest their brain in shifts while keeping watch throughout the entire night. This is the reason that for most birds, those outside roost positions are like, musical chairs and being the one left standing. Nobody wants them. but it's just really interesting how they navigate these things. Now, it's worth noting that in backyard flocks, this isn't something you're always going to see. And if I had to make a guess about why that is, it's probably because they're very much more safe in our yards most of the time than they would be in the wild. Eventually, I think they do recognize that that coop is completely secure, that nothing can get in there, and they sort of let their guard down a little bit. They're more willing to go ahead and not keep that hyper-vigilant, close watch all night long that they would in the wild. But it's interesting to keep this in mind because, a lot of people, if you've got your, hen or your rooster on your lap and you're snuggling them, one of the biggest compliments with a lot of animals is when they fall asleep on your lap, right? Mm-hmm. Just the comfort and the security that's indicated by that. And so it can be really easy with chickens. We've had so many times where one of them is super comfy on our lap and they've got the eye nearest us shut. And then we kind of lean and we look around and that outside eye is wide open and wide awake. And it's easy to feel like, oh, they're not actually at ease or they haven't actually gone to sleep cuddling me.
Or maybe jump to a conclusion like something's wrong,
Right. But this is completely normal for them, and it actually doesn't mean that they're not napping on you. Even if that outside eye is wide open and alert, they could literally still be sleeping. So just
and dreaming.
And dreaming. And that leads into the fact that they do dream. Not every animal has been confirmed to have REM sleep and experience dream states, but chickens have actually been found to do this. So whenever you wonder what your chickens are dreaming about overnight, that is not a crazy question. They really are.
And if you've ever woken up stressed out or anxious because of a bad dream you've had, you can probably apply that to chickens. And, if they're having an off day or they attacked you out of nowhere, it could possibly be because they had a bad dream.
Yeah. Well, we've all been there, right? That we, have this, this dream that somebody, cracked the window and snuck in and killed us in the middle of the night. And then, we go to bed and we have to sit there and question, do I want to leave my window open for that cool, fresh breeze? Do I want to add an additional lock? And we know maybe that we're being irrational and that didn't actually happen. But those emotions take so much longer to die down. And that fear that it generates takes so much longer to lie down or to die down. And so I always wonder if on these days where, maybe a rooster is just really hyper reactive, he's being very abnormally defensive or territorial, and we're racking our brains and we just can't think of anything that would account for this or why it's happening. What if he had a really bad nightmare and he's just feeling really freaked out and on edge still?
And this is why every time we tuck our boys, every single night, we give them good night hugs and kisses, and we tell them sweet dreams, happy chickie dreams.
I make them promise me every single night, good boys get good dreams.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So again, just one of these things to consider because it depends, so much of our care really depends on knowing these quirks and these really unique differences, even when it comes to things like, bringing a single bird inside the house to sleep. Keep in mind that they're going to be in a position of feeling like the sentinel all night. You probably want to have pretty solid walls to either side of them. You probably want to have a really quiet environment and really try to put a focus on helping them feel safe because they don't have those other birds to support them. They don't have those guards or the luxury of sharing that burden, of keeping out an eye for danger all night long. Just so much of the interaction we have with them is going to come through these lenses, and they're really truly going to be seeing the world around them in a completely different way than we would. They're seeing things we don't see. They're not accounting for things that we're able to account for. And then when they respond to these situations, they're going to do it in a way that doesn't directly translate for us. That's going to have to be decoded, and we're going to have to kind of play detective. We're going to have to look at the reaction that they're giving us, and then we're going to have to look to other cues to determine whether that's reliable and what else is going into it.
And the more you know, I mean, the more power you have to influence their lives and health for the better.
Absolutely. And really, so many of the problems that people come across and the sad outcomes and the challenges that come with keeping these birds really does come down to just communication barriers, that different experience and those different perceptions. The more we can do to bridge those gaps and really come as close as possible to understanding what they're seeing and the things we do, the less conflict we'll have and the better the outcome will be, not just for them, but for us as well.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and we do hope you join us again next week. We've got a few different interesting topics lined up, and we're looking forward to sharing them with you. Take care.